Hello, this is the first vodcast for our biochemistry unit, and in this vodcast, we're going to be learning about the four types of organic compounds found in life, and so we'll be able to distinguish between them. The four compounds are proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Before we can get to that, we first have to do some basics, and this is just basic chemistry, and you first have to be able to read chemical formulas. And probably more familiar one you see is H2O, and I put a 4 in front of it. What does that mean? Well, when you see a subscript, that's the 2 that you see next to the hydrogen, that applies to the atom. So H2 with a 2 down below, that means that there are 2 hydrogen atoms. So H2O means that that compound contains 2 hydrogens, and since there's no number by the oxygen or the O, that means there's only 1 oxygen. So that's water, and water has 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Now the 4 in front means that we have 4 molecules of H2O. So if you were going to count up how many atoms we have altogether, that's 4 times 2, which is 8 atoms of hydrogen, and 4 times 1, which is 4 atoms of oxygen. You see the number in front when you've got a whole equation like what we see down here, where we have C6H12O6 yields, that's what the arrow means, 6CO2 plus 6H2O, and I have the 6 there because there it's balanced, meaning that one of the principles of chemistry is, and also physics, is that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So if you get the number of carbons on the left of the arrow, that's exactly the same as number of carbons on the right of the arrow. You won't have to do this in this course. That's something, the skill you'll be learning if you take chemistry. And when you see that arrow there, that means it's a chemical reaction. And the reactants, or things that we start out with, are on the left. That's C6H12O6, which is glucose. And that yields 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water. And those things on the right are the products. That's what we end up with. We also will have to be able to distinguish between organic and inorganic compounds. Originally, organic meant compounds that are just found in life, and we've found since we started really looking into chemistry that organic compounds are found not associated with life. So today, organic means that it's a compound that contains both carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms. Anything else is inorganic. So if we look in the table here of some common compounds, just going line by line, C6H12O6, which is glucose, which is a sugar, that is organic because there's carbon and hydrogen. H2O, water, is inorganic because while there is a hydrogen, there's no carbon, and you have to have both. CH3, which is methane, which is a natural gas, that's organic because once again it has carbon and hydrogen. CO2, which is carbon dioxide, is inorganic because while it has carbon, it doesn't have hydrogen, and they have to have both. That long formula you see there, well, actually for organic compounds, they can be really long, and that's actually short. That's an amino acid. That's the amino acid lysine. And if you've ever watched the movie Jurassic Park, lysine was the amino acid which the dinosaurs were not able to make on their own, so that should have prevented them from being able to escape because they couldn't basically make lysine, and they need to have that in their diet, and they would die if they ever escaped. So that's lysine there, and that's organic because there's carbon and hydrogen in it. The next one, NaCl, which is sodium chloride, which is table salt. That's inorganic. It has neither carbon nor hydrogen. And the compound that you see down there, C10H16N5O13P3, that is ATP, and ATP is basically the compound that contains energy for our cells. and we'll be running into that quite a bit. And that is also organic, because you see it has 10 carbon atoms and 16 hydrogen atoms. And the last one, oxygen, O2, is inorganic because it has neither carbon nor hydrogen. Now, when we look at any foods you buy in the supermarket, you see nutrition facts. And nutrition facts, you'll see the 4 types of organic compounds. First, just to let you know a few things about it. Serving size is very important in terms to be familiar with, because usually what we eat is actually, like what they serve at restaurants and stuff like that, way beyond 1 serving size. Calories is a measure of energy, and the first thing we see here is fat. Fat is one of the compounds that we're going to be discussing, though the official name for it is lipid, and fat is one kind of lipid. Cholesterol is there because it's medically important for most people, because a lot of people have high cholesterol, and cholesterol is a fat. Sodium is NaCl, and that's inorganic. It's there because a lot of people need to watch their salt intake. The next one, carbohydrate, that is one of the 4 compounds that we'll be studying there. And you see there are actually 3 things down there. One is dietary fiber, and dietary fiber is a carbohydrate that we cannot digest. So it goes right through us, and we don't get any energy from it, but it is very important in terms of our digestive health. It helps keep you regular. And sugars we'll be discussing quite a bit. Those are basically the simple carbohydrates. And if you look at the weight there, you see we've got 0 and 5, but the total is 31. And the rest of that are the complex carbohydrates, like starch. And the next one down is the third of the 4, and that's proteins. And we'll be discussing that. The 4th one we don't see there, and that's nucleic acids. The rest of the things down there, vitamins and minerals, those are things we have to have in our diet. And they will be in one of the other categories, either inorganic like calcium or iron, and the vitamins could be lipids. They could also be proteins. One way of understanding the 4 types of organic compounds found in life is that they're like Legos. In that, if you look at the 2 pictures here we see of Legos, is that Legos are made of building blocks, and you can take the building blocks apart. That's sort of like when we eat food and we digest it, and we could rearrange those same just like we can take the Legos and rearrange it to make something completely different from what we started out with. We can also take the building blocks that we digested and rearrange those to make completely different molecules that we need in life, and they're very different from the stuff that we ate. Like everything that makes you you is something that you ate. And it's all how it is arranged. Like starch and cellulose are both made from the same building blocks, which is glucose. Starch is a complex carbohydrate that we eat and we get energy from. Cellulose is the main component of a cell wall, and we can't even digest it. That fiber is cellulose. Now, the first of the 4 that we're going to discuss are carbohydrates. And the building blocks, and you have to know the building blocks, those are simple sugars, also called monosaccharides. Mono meaning 1, saccharide meaning sugar. And examples of those, and there are several examples, just have 2 of them here, are glucose and fructose. There are some other ones like table sugar. Actually, I know you've seen a lot of them, but here's table sugar. This actually is not glucose. It's regular table sugar is sucrose, which actually are 2 combined, which are actually glucose and, I believe, fructose. Another kind of disaccharide, which that is made of 2 sugars, is lactose, which is milk sugar, and that's glucose and another type of sugar called galactose put together. A polysaccharide is a large carbohydrate, and there the molecule can be very, very large. And examples of that would be cellulose, which you have to know. The ones I have down here, the three are listed. You have to know those. Those could very easily appear on the Regents exam. Cellulose, which is found in the cell wall, and that's the structural support that you see under the function. And then you've got short-term energy storage, which is starch, like we find in the potato, which is practically all starch. And glycogen, which is our version of starch. Like starch is something that's found in plants. And glycogen is what we use for our short-term energy storage, and that's primarily found in the liver. It's also found in our muscles. Next are lipids. The lipids, for them, those are basically the fats and the oils, and the building block for those are fatty acid and glycerol. And unlike carbohydrates, which tend to be like the chains of sugars, glycerol, with the lipids, you've got like one glycerol attached to 3 fatty acids. Fatty acid is basically just a very long chain composed of carbons with hydrogens attached to it on the sides. And on nutrition facts, you see saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats, basically, you've got the maximum number of hydrogen atoms. It's all single bonds. And those tend to be solid. Like, for example, this cheese stick here is basically made of saturated fats. So it's solid, and fats are basically what we find in animals. Unsaturated fats, you've got less than the maximum of hydrogen atoms, and that's because you tend to have double and triple bonds in between the carbon atoms instead of all single bonds, and those tend to be liquid at room temperature. For example, oils. And the oils tend to be found in plants. And one other type of fat that you'll sometimes see in food, and this is completely a man-made one, are hydrogenated fats or hydrogenated oils. And basically what they do is they take a plant oil like corn oil and they turn it into a saturated fat, so it becomes solid at room temperature rather than being liquid. A lot of margarines are like that, and these hydrogenated fats are the kind that are profoundly unhealthy for us. So a lot of doctors recommend taking hydrogenated fats out of your diet. Now, examples, I've already gone over a few. We've got fats, oils. Cholesterol is a lipid. And the phospholipids we've already discussed in the last unit because that's the main component of the cell membrane. So the functions are long-term energy storage, and also it's structural in terms of being part of the cell membrane. Next we have the proteins. And building blocks, there are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and those are arranged in a long chain, and the chain tends to be folded on itself, and that makes many, many kinds of proteins. There are 10,000 different kinds of protein found in each of us. By the way, polypeptide is what we call a chain of amino acids. Peptide is basically what they call the bond between different amino acids. The proteins, like in our food, primarily you would have something like an egg here is made primarily of protein. And in this also you can see the shape of the protein has to do with this, with how it's so important with the protein. Like normally when you heat something up, say if you take something that's liquid and you heat it, it will boil and turn into a gas. Not the egg. You heat the egg, it turns into a solid. Normally if you have a liquid, the way you make something a solid is you cool it off and it will freeze and become a solid. But if you warm it with the egg, it's different. You cook it and it becomes a solid and it stays a solid. What happens there is that you basically change some of the bonds that are holding the proteins in here in a particular shape, and that completely changes the shape and therefore the properties of the protein. One of the main types of proteins that we're going to be studying in this unit are enzymes, and we'll have a few lessons on that, and those are proteins that speed up chemical reactions. Other functions is that proteins can provide structural support, They can transport substances. They can communicate signals within a cell, between a cell. The last kind, nucleic acids, I'm not really going to discuss all that much. This is the limit of nucleic acids in this unit, and the reason for that is we are really going to be getting into it in genetics, and there's no point doing it right now. And the building blocks are nucleotides, and the primary examples that we run into is that DNA are nucleic acids, as are RNA, ATP, and ADP. Now the ATP and the ADP, those two we are going to focus on in this unit because ATP and ADP are involved in respiration, and so they're the energy carriers. Main function for nucleic acids is that they store and communicate genetic information. Now here are the concluding questions. Number 1, how many oxygen atoms are in 6CO2? Don't forget that you need to look at how many there are in each molecule of CO2 and how many molecules of CO2 we have. Number 2, what atoms must be found in an organic compound? There are 2 of them. What are those 2? 3, list the building blocks for carbohydrates, for proteins, for lipids, and for nucleic acids. Number 4, name one function for each of these 4 types of organic compounds. The 4 are the same that are in 3, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And that's the end of this podcast, and I'll see you soon in class.